Welcome back this evening, friends. It has been so good to be with you, to be on this pilgrimage with you this week, moving together towards God's good new creation, wrestling with some questions along the way. And tonight, we are going to answer or ask a question that I think all of us have probably asked at some point along the way. On the road with Jesus toward new creation, what do I do when I'm an outsider? Now, as I mentioned, that very first night we were here, Tommy and I, my husband and I, we lived abroad for a season. We lived in Sicily. Anybody know where that is? Right, okay. So like if Italy is a boot, Sicily is the rock, the boot is kicking. Okay? It is a little island off the tip of Sicily, and we lived there and got to know the people there and like engaging in Italian and all the things, teaching English. And I will tell you, there is nothing that will make you more aware of your own country and culture and perspectives than being immersed in somebody else's, okay? Pros and cons on that. Pros and cons. So for example, I loved every afternoon the Sicilians had what they would call the la pausa. It's kind of like la siesta, right? La pausa was when from 1 to 4, like everything was closed, which was kind of annoying at first. But they would have this time of rest and being with family, and I thought it was really beautiful. And essentially, I became very judgy about my home culture. I was like, ugh, Americans, we work so much, right? However, con about the Italian culture was that I hated how the Italians, instead when you're lining up for coffee, there was no line. There was a cluster. They would like congregate around the counter and like, who's next? Who knows? Really? Who knows whose turn it is? And y'all are rude and you need to be like us Americans and act like civilized human beings. And so we also noticed there was like, as we were continuing to live into this culture and live in Europe and all those things, that there were significant differences in our worldview that went far beyond la pausa and lining or clustering up for coffee, right? And it was often portrayed, and we could kind of perceive it through media or entertainment. So for example, we watched a lot of movies with them when we were there because we were doing English immersion, so we'd watch these English movies and kind of help them understand it and whatever. But if a movie was European, French in particular, it was almost always extremely depressing, okay? And almost always unresolved. You're like, that's the end? That's terrible. That's terrible. And there are philosophical and historical reasons for that, but this is not history, so just trust me and we're going to move on. French movies, very sad. Okay? Now, American movies, there is almost always, not always, there is almost always a very happy ending, and it is pretty much resolved, unless they are deliberately setting you up for a sequel, right? And so, because that's how we optimistic Americans like it. An outcome we can control and determine, and no loose ends, thank you very much. I want to go home thinking, there is order to the world. But there is something even more common in American movies, and it is this kind of trope. It's endearing, though, of the rogue outsider. All right. Now, watch any cop movie, or crime-fighting movie in particular, and you will see it. So there's like a big crime, okay? So there is maybe a huge issue, like a conspiracy, or there's a crime ring, or there's like a serial killer. And the main character is diving into the action with her fellow officers when, lo and behold, she stumbles across an inconvenient clue, right? And almost inevitably, she is taken off the case. Turn in your weapon and your badge, officer, you're off the case. And so what does she do? Does she go home and she's like, oh, you're right? No, she goes rogue, right? And what happens? She, by her lonesome, cracks the case, and she gets her badge and her weapon, and usually a promotion at the end of the movie. And I tell you, go and watch some cop movies and you will see what I'm talking about. But it encapsulates so much of what we value as Americans, this fierce independence, individualism, bucking the system, insisting on the outcome we want. Literally, this is the storyline of Zootopia, okay? That is the line. It is a cop movie. Go check it out. Well, it makes for great, if not somewhat predictable, movies. But here's the thing. In those movies, we say we love the outsider. We love when they do their own thing, when they think differently, when they act apart from the crowd. But in reality, that's not how it works. When you are not on the movie screen, when you are here in real life going about your business, we all know full well, society does not look kindly on the outsider. the one who is different, the one who doesn't match the other. Instead, it's rejection, it's ostracizing, it's excluding, mocking, dehumanizing, all the things. And I think it's safe to say that all of us at some point have experienced that experience of being the outsider, the other, at some point in our lives, probably in varying degrees, sometimes on a minor scale, sometimes on a major scale. Now, on a small scale for me. In high school, I made the cheerleading squad. Is anyone surprised? Right? Because I'm like super intense. But I'm just very cheery. And I'm very energetic, and I really love football. And so it seemed like the perfect pastime for me. It was the right fit. So anyway, my dad pastored a local church, and it happened to be an army town, which meant, if you've ever lived in an army town, that the town was way more diverse than the average Kansas town of 40,000 people, okay? Like way more. In fact, my dear friend Sarah and I were the only white girls on our cheerleading squad, okay? Only once. And you know those stereotypes about white girls and how they can't dance? Like, totally unjust, right? Ugh. Except I am that stereotype in the flesh. Hello, nice to meet you. Here I am. And my cheer friends, they were all more gifted in like rhythm department. They were the ones choreographing these dances. And I'm like, girl, my body does not do that thing. And my coach would call out to me. She would be like, hey, Sarah, what's wrong with your arms? Like, why are you so stiff? Reminder, my name is Stephanie. Sarah was the other white girl. My coach, bless her heart, she could not tell us apart because all those white girls look the same. And it was funny. Like, I was the awkward white girl, just excited to cheer for some football, right? The lovable, quirky outsider. And I just rolled with it. But this is why I could roll with it, because that was the only space in my life in which I was the minority. It wasn't my experience every waking second. I had other places where I could be fully known and people didn't call me Sarah. But sometimes it's on the not so small scale of being an outsider, a little bit less funny. I moved a number of times because like I said, my dad was a pastor, and we moved across the country, and I would have to work up the courage to walk into a room full of people I had never met, and they all knew each other and had a bestie, and somehow make a life with them. Or everybody was going out and they were all doing the fun things together, but I wasn't included or invited, and that stings. And you feel so alone in the universe. You're surrounded by 1,000 other like middle schoolers, and yet somehow you know in your bones, I am an outsider. But there's even more if we continue to dig deeper, isn't there? My little anecdotes probably seem ridiculous to you. You who have experienced extreme poverty and you got to show up to school and act like everything's fine and you had breakfast, knowing your life is nothing like theirs. And those of you who were the only person of color, not just on the cheerleading squad, but in your class or in your school. For those of you whose parents were undocumented and nobody can know. Or for the one wrestling with your sexuality and you don't know who to talk to or who can support you or who can help you. Or you're on the autism spectrum and you are neurodivergent and everything around you, from jokes to relationships to social mores, feels like a foreign language. Outsiders. It's not funny or quirky or winsome like some cop gone rogue to solve a crime. Being an outsider makes you vulnerable. Poverty and gender and being undocumented or being a refugee or neurodivergent or a racial or sexual minority or the wrong religion, you are an outsider. And this isn't a modern experience, let's not pretend. Since people have started hanging out as humans and building societies, there have been outsiders, those who break the norms, sometimes because they choose, sometimes just because that's who they are. And similar categories too, the poor, the refugee, the immigrant, the orphan, the widow. In ancient cultures like those in the Old Testament did not have societal safety nets. So you couldn't apply to the local governor for food aid or refugee status. It was like a fend for yourself kind of world. Like being an outsider could be deadly, like literally. And so the book of Ruth tells the story about the ultimate outsider. Her name is Ruth, if you did not get that from the title of the book. And she's a foreigner, and she is from Moab, which totally known as pagans by the Israelites because traditionally they were descended from an incestuous relationship, and so everybody looked down on them. And they were poor. Ruth was poor. Ultimately, she will be widowed, and she's a female in a patriarchal society. I mean, the list goes on. Now, some of you may be new to the faith, and you didn't grow up in church, and I am so glad that you are here and you are engaging in the story of God. But some of you, like me, grew up immersed in Christian subculture. So you will know what I mean when I say, girl, you just need to wait for your Boaz. I hear that. I hear that. Okay. Am I right? And this is a little cultural interpretation for these of you who are like, what is she talking about? When I say, girl, you need to wait for your Boaz, what I am saying is, girl, you need to wait for that super spiritual dude that's going to come and give your life meaning and purpose, that godly man that God has just for you, and he's going to rescue you from a life of singleness. Just wait for your Boaz. Like there are entire novels. Did you know there is a sub-genre of books that are Christian romance novels? Check it out. Yep. Weird romances, you know what I'm... So the story of Ruth has been morphed into this weird romance story, okay? This local immigrant girl, she's swept off her feet while she's gathering grain bits. And Boaz, sweeps in as the rescuer, and they had a kid, and it's happily ever after. Thus, the Christian novel subculture or subgenre, okay? Or maybe even some marriage books. So there you go. Something to Google later tonight. Except that is not what the story is about. It's about love, but it is not like that. It's a certain form of love that runs through the entirety of the Old Testament, and that is the love that we call chesed. I'm just going to say chesed. There's supposed to be a little bit of that in there, okay? But keep that word in mind as we go through tonight, because I'm going to keep saying it over and over and over again. Chesed. Chesed is one of those words that doesn't translate very well into the English. It simply means way more than that one little word love can bear. Hesed is the undying, undeserved, persistent, delivering, kind, protecting, loyal, won't let you let go love of God. And it is the foundation upon which the story of God rests. God's passion for God's people, for all of creation, that shapes the entire narrative of Scripture. It's the love that keeps wooing us back onto the path of pilgrimage, even when we go into the ditch, on the road to new creation. Now, Tommy and I got this kids' Bible for our littles a few years back. It's called the Jesus Storybook Bible. It's so good. I would read it at night to my kids, and I'd be weeping, and then Jesus, and Josephine, who was 4, she's like, Mom, are you okay? I was like, it's just, I'm getting blessed. And the way they would translate Hesed for little kids, this is what they would say, Hesed. It is God's never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. But Hesed is not exclusively reserved for God to bestow upon people or creation. As God's special creation, made in God's image, we also have the privilege of living out that very same Hesed that God has poured out upon us so freely. And it is at the heart of what it means to live into our identity as humans. And in the story of Ruth, we are going to see the Hesed going in every direction, right? From God to humans, particularly to the outsiders. From human to humans, there's going to be Hesed all over the place. And so let's set the stage, shall we? Now, to understand the story, if you open up your Bibles to the book of Ruth, if you look at the page right before it, it's the end of a book called the book of Judges. And the very last line of the very last chapter of that book says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. And it's just as cringy as it sounds. No king, no temple. There's no active tabernacle that they reference at that point. There's limited worship, limited knowledge of God. There's just kind of like these random bursts of faithfulness, maybe a judge here and there. But overall, there's no spiritual direction or identity to speak of. And into this mess, we find the story of Ruth. And not only are things a mess in Israel because there's no leadership, political or spiritual, there is now a famine to boot, like famine. And an Israelite named Elimelech, he realizes we can't survive. So he takes his wife and his 2 sons, and he flees to Moab. They are famine refugees in what is considered a pagan land. Outsiders, right? Concerning refugees, right now we're seeing a lot on the news of refugees that have fled Haiti. And I recently read, and I thought this was so meaningful, and I think it's something that will help inform our perspective tonight. You have to understand, no one puts their children on a boat unless the water is safer than the shore. I want to go home, but home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore. Elimelech has felt home pushing him away. And so, to help his family survive, he takes them to flee starvation to Moab. And they try to make a life for themselves there. They are the outsiders in this pagan land. There is no social safety net, no support, no family. But the sons manage to take wives. But even after a few years, things haven't improved. There's no grandchildren to speak of. It seems like they're just surviving. And within a few years, Elimelech and both of his sons are dead, having left behind no children. And Elimelech's wife, Naomi, and the two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, they are in deep weeds, okay? They are vulnerable, they are alone, they are impoverished, there are no men to take care of them in a patriarchal society. They are in danger. And so all three of these women head back to Israel, and that's where we're first going to encounter Hesed. Hear the word of the Lord from Ruth 1, starting in verse 8. They're on the road to Israel. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you find security, each of you, in the house of a husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. May the Lord deal kindly with you. May the Lord do hesed for you. May the Lord show you steadfast love and undying faithfulness and deliver you from this dire situation. May the Lord do right by you as you have sought to do right by me and your dead husbands. And so both Ruth and Orpah, they're like, no, we want to stay with you. We love you. We're devoted to you, as was the tradition. But finally, after some more, verbal battering, Orpah finally says, okay, fine, and goes back to her own people. But here comes Ruth. Starting in verse 16, we see the emergence of Hesed again, but it is not God doing it, but a human being imitating the Hesed of God. And who's doing it? Poor, widowed, pagan, outsider. And this is what she says. Naomi, do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me and more as well, if even death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. That is doing hesed, committing to this persistent faithfulness, even though for Ruth it means a lifetime of sacrifice. She's leaving everything she's ever known to go with her mother-in-law to this land she's never been, to be devoted to her and her care. Now Ruth, she's been a foreigner, raised to serve these false gods. She's a woman, and she's been excluded from much of the religious practices, even in the Jewish community, and she is the one in the story who mirrors the Hesed action of God. Now, if you are looking for like a come to Jesus, except Jesus isn't incarnated yet, it's fine. If you're looking for a conversion moment of Ruth turning to the God of Israel, this is it. The moment that she declared with her life that she would live to mirror the Hesed action of God, of whom she knew so little. And so with that, they go to Israel. They go to Bethlehem. And so we see in the story something is stirring. Things are looking real bad. It's very dark, but new creation is stirring under the surface. The Hesed of God is at work. But here's the thing. They pull into town, Ruth and Naomi. It's Naomi's hometown. She knows everybody. Naomi and Ruth are clearly not well. They've been ravaged by grief and loss, fear, long, dusty travel. They've probably had inadequate provisions. They're dirty, they're skinny, they're sad. And what do people do? They're like, oh my word, Naomi, is that you? You look terrible. And then, nothing. Man, Naomi, you look so bad. We're going to pray for you. We're going to pray for you. Now, I mentioned earlier, in ancient times, there were no social safety nets, no WIC, no Medicaid, nothing. Except with Israel, the people that God chose to be this vehicle of God-saving action. In the law in the Old Testament, you saw it on the screen. God makes it clear, it's not supposed to be like that among you. Remember, when you were refugees fleeing Egypt, Show mercy then to the refugees who come to you. Hey, don't abuse them, don't take advantage. And when a husband dies and leaves behind a wife and kids, you guys, the community, you're responsible to care for them. Don't abuse or neglect or ignore. And yet when the widow walks into Bethlehem, crickets from the people of God. Just whispers and glances full of pity and disdain. No hesed to be found. No relatives running to the rescue. No insiders of their shared faith bringing over casseroles. There was no food pounding. So once again, you're sensing a theme here. The outsider is the one who rises to the call of hesed. While everyone else just looks on in pity, Ruth gets up the next morning. She gets up early and she goes out into the fields to glean, which basically is picking up all the little bits of grain that the harvesters drop, trying to scrape up enough to make a meal at the end of the day. It's back-breaking. It's dangerous. She's a woman in a field with a bunch of men she doesn't know. She's been widowed. She's vulnerable. There's no men that'll come to her rescue so they can have their way if they choose. She is small. She is female. But here comes Boaz. But it's not like that. It's not like you think. He is not the prince come to rescue the outsider Ruth from the tower of her sufferings. But he does see her. He recognizes something in her. This hesed in her is shining forth. Now, have you ever known anybody like that? Somebody who just cannot help but exude something different altogether. There is something winsome and good, something in them that just whispers Jesus' name. Boaz hears the whispers of hesed in this outsider Ruth. And he gives her extra food and he protects her in the field. I mean, it's not exactly hesed, but it's kindness to the one that everybody else has shunned. Something is stirring. And God is so determined to do it through this outsider. God is absolutely pushing an agenda here. He says, there are no outsiders, just people you haven't let in yet. They're my children, so move over. Like, I'm feeling some real strong dad energy here. Like, this is my kid, and you will include them? Thank you. Now, while Naomi is grateful for the extra grain from Boaz, she's like, we can't just, have grain. Ruth, you have to have a future. And this Hesed embodying daughter of hers, and Scripture says, this is what, and this is from the Message. This is how Naomi responds to Ruth. She comes home with all this food. And one day her mother-in-law, Naomi, said to Ruth, my dear daughter, isn't it about time that I arranged a good home for you so you can have a happy life? And isn't Boaz our close relative, the one whose young women you have been working, with whom you've been working? Maybe it's time to make our move. Tonight is the night of Boaz's barley festival at the threshing floor. Take a bath, put on some perfume, get all dressed up and go to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there until the party is well underway and he's had plenty of food and drink. When you see him slipping off to sleep, watch where he lies down and then go there. Lie at his feet to let him know that you are available to him for marriage. Then wait and see what he says. He'll tell you what to do. Awkward. Way to make it weird, Naomi. Like I'm already weird to everybody else. Nice girls do not go to the threshing floor at night, Mom. But again, Ruth acts in Hesed. She says, if you say so, I'll do it, just as you have told me. Awkward or not, she does it. And she's laying, she gets all dolled up, and she's laying at Boaz's feet, and he jerks awake, no doubt scared and freaked out that there's a woman at his feet. And he says, according to Scripture, he says, who are you? And she answered, I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin. He said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter, for this last instance of loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich, and now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask, for all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. When Boaz says this last instant of loyalty, you guessed it, is Hesed. That never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love, the love of God. And you, Ruth, you have been more faithful to the laws of our God than us. You, a woman, a foreigner, a pagan, an outsider, impoverished, you have done Hesed as God has done Hesed. It's happily ever after from there. A marriage, a baby boy named Obed, God acting in Hesed, weaving this outsider into God's family in a powerful way, way above what anybody could have ever imagined. Hear the word from Matthew, the Gospel, chapter 1. It says, an account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. And skipping down a bit, Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And then we reach this, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Messiah. Ruth, the great-grandmother of King David. Ruth is the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus of Nazareth. God saw fit not to just bring her in and be like, yeah, you can sit in the back, but wove her into the genetics of the Messiah himself. Now the people of God failed to do Hesed. They failed to move forward toward new creation of God's healing love. But God will not be deterred. And if you remember nothing else from these 5 sermons, please remember this. Nothing, not even the disobedience of God's people, nothing can derail new creation. The outsider is welcomed. But not just welcomed, woven into God's story in this inextricable way. God doesn't just invite Ruth as a house guest, he makes her one of the family. You see, Ruth had eyes to see. Maybe it was because she was so vulnerable, I don't know. But she had eyes to see this Hesed from God. And unlike the people of God who had experienced that radical inclusion and yet didn't put it into practice, Ruth did. Ruth did Hesed. Ruth got on the road to new creation as a response to God's unbounded love and inclusion. The outsider shames the insider with her radical obedience. And here's the good news, friends. God acts in Hesed toward you. That never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love, it's extended to you. Doesn't matter who you are. Insider, outsider, white, black, brown, straight, gay, Republican, Democrat, citizen, dreamer, God looks upon you with such love and has acted and will continue to act in Hesed towards you, that unwavering faithfulness. Now, there was a song playing when you first came in from Ren Collective called There's No Outsider, and this is what it says. You are our refuge. You have no borders. When I was a stranger knocking at your door, you took me in with no questions and no conditions. When I was a sinner running from your grace, you called me friend. There are no outsiders to your love. We are all welcome. There's grace enough. When I have wondered, Lord, your cross is the open door. There are no outsiders. I'm not an outsider to your love. That is good news. With good news comes a call. Grace always invites a response. See, Ruth is not just a recipient of God's radical Hesed. She responded to that Hesed by doing Hesed, by acting in that sacrificial, steadfast love and loyalty. And so, if you are an insider, if you were like me, and you are a lifelong church kid, if your mother gave birth to you in the church pew, and you fit into this space with ease, you don't have to self-edit, you don't have to code switch constantly, there is a word for you today. And it's a tough word, but it's okay because I'm leaving tomorrow. Insiders, you need to check yourself. God has acted in radical Hesed toward you. Are you embodying that to others? Especially the vulnerable on the margins, the ones who don't fit? Are you acting in sacrificial, loving, loyal ways to those on the fringe, or are you basking in your insider status? And to you outsiders, to the ones who aren't sure they belong, to the ones who are trying to make themselves smaller to fit, who wonder if you ever really feel like you're one of the group, here's a word for you. Lift up your head. You are welcome. God has acted in hesed toward you, and whether you know God or not. And you are welcome with all of your story into this grand story of God, that story that is moving toward creation. It's your story too. And like Ruth, you are invited to take that radical, inclusive, loving loyalty of God and put it into action as well. The outsider shames the insider with their radical obedience. Bring the gospel to me, the ultimate insider. The reality is, we will probably be on both sides of either of these points in our lives, insider, outsider, to varying degrees. But this truth doesn't change. God has acted in hesed toward you. God reaches out to you with that never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. His love is wooing you toward the future of new creation. And in response to what God has done, we are invited to act in hesed towards one another, to receive hesed with our open, empty hands, and then to put it into practice, to receive hesed, do hesed. Now, our worship team is going to lead us in just kind of a reflective song tonight. And I honestly, as I was writing this, I wasn't sure what the response to this is. But I think there's a couple ways that we might respond. For some of you, you know me. You're the Sunday school kid. You're the quizzing all-star. You know the difference between Elijah and Elisha. You're an insider. And there might tonight be a space for confession. Like I have centered my story and my experience, and I have not created space for the other. There are ways in which I have silenced or made small those who are different and asked them to become like me before I would welcome them. That merits confession. But there are some of you who, as I speak of this outsider language, you're like, oh, that is me. I don't belong. I don't fit. Could you, for a moment, entertain the possibility that you're welcome? Like really welcome? And you don't have to shave off the sharp edges or fold yourself into a certain shape to come to the feet of Jesus. That as you are, he invites you into his love. Because it's true. It is the gospel truth. So whatever response looks like for you tonight, I don't know. Maybe it is a word of confession to another. Maybe it is a kneeling in submission and humility. Maybe it is an open, extended hand saying, I want to intentionally receive the hesed of God. Do that thing and let the Spirit stir. New creation is on the move.
Thanks for joining us for chapel today. Be sure to check back every Tuesday and Thursday for our next gathering.